Hi, my name is John Chapman. I am a scoring mix engineer here in Los Angeles. I got my start after I graduated from college. I took an internship with a notable composer. From there, I moved to Remote Control Productions, which is a studio run by Hans Zimmer. And from there, I just took on more and more work, said yes to as much as I could, and here I am now. The recording and mixing process is really the idea begins with the composer, not with me. The composer comes to me and says, hey, here's what I want to do. And I say, okay. And then I propose an idea of how to do it. So the idea starts with the composer, comes to me. I say, well, record it like this. After the recording process, I've already started to develop ideas on how to mix it. So I bring the recordings into the mix room. I execute what I have planned. I play it for the composer or the client. They say, we love it, or we want to change these things. We go and we make it something that the client wants it to be. And then we take it to mastering. Now, mastering I usually don't do myself. I try to be objective as much as possible with the music, and I've already given myself to the piece of music. So mastering I like to leave for a third party, and that's really just when somebody takes it and they listen down to it and they do somewhat broad shaping to the music, either through EQ or level or compression. And then we upload it to iTunes and you all listen to it on your phones. So there is the fundamentals of doing a pop song and doing a score are the same, right? You're working in the same DAW. For me, it's Pro Tools. And you're using a lot of the same tools. But it's really the approach that you have to take, which is different. A pop song is supposed to be a standalone piece of music. You know, it has to be able to play through somebody's radio, and they need to jam out to it. So the vocals need to be heard, the snare needs to be heard, the important elements that people latch onto in a song need to be stars. This can also be said for a film score, but the film score is not the primary, in most cases, is not the primary audio that the audience is listening to. Dialogue is. So score is really meant to play around the dialogue and to bring out the emotion of the scene. So my focus is a lot more on how can I extract the emotion from the greater piece. That's really like in a few words a big difference between doing a pop song and doing a score. Well, if I were going to talk about difficulty, they're both difficult. They both take a different approach. Sometimes a score is the process for it is a lot more convoluted than a pop song. A pop song is pretty straightforward. We already have the sound. It exists in the world. We're used to hearing pop songs. So you kind of, when you get a pop song, it needs to be done. It's fairly straightforward. There are times when it's not, but generally, what you need to do. With a score, there's often a bit of discussion that has to happen and a bit of figuring out that needs to happen. But they're both challenging. They're both challenging. They're both easy. They're both challenging. So how do I evaluate the difference between a good and a bad mix? Well, one, I need to make sure that I listen to the mix in an environment that I trust before I make any judgment on it. When I'm listening to well, first of all, and also it depends on what type of music it is. Obviously, a pop song, I'm going to judge a mix by its cleanliness. Do the vocals have too many breaths in them, or do I hear noises in the background? Am I getting some great imaging? Does the kick sound good? Is the snare what it needs to be? Are the vocals nice and airy? Is it satisfying? Is it satisfying what I would expect it to satisfy? When it comes to film scores, now that's a different situation because you are working with composers who have, in many cases, ideas that are new or that are verging on unheard material. So sometimes you have to wrap your head around the idea before you can make a judgment on it. I always say, there's no such thing as an incorrect mix or an incorrect piece of music, because somewhere in the spectrum of art and music, whatever you've done will be there, right? So I hope that answers your question. But there's judging a score is really, do I like the violin sound? That's pretty. That's what it is. Do I think that the existence of what it is the composer's idea? When it comes to mixing, I generally don't have a clear schedule. But what I do like to do is I like to get the music ahead of time so I can listen to it, just demos, and I can wrap my head around it. And then the night before I start a mix, I'll just be thinking about how I want to set up, the type of sounds I might want to get, the type of reverbs I might want to use. And then when I come in the morning, I execute all those technical aspects, and then I might take a break and step back, get lunch maybe, and then I'll come back in the afternoon and I'll do a bit more creative massaging. I'll listen to what the song or the cue needs, and I'll make changes based on that. But when it comes to schedule, no, I don't really have a clear schedule. Usually my schedule is dictated by what the post-production schedule is on a project, when they need the material. But, given a perfect situation, I take my time. I pace myself. As a mixer, while you are given a lot of liberty when it comes to the sound or the creation of the sound, the path with which you get there, you are really listening to the composer, and the composer is listening to the director or the producer. So you're kind of listening to everyone in the process. Generally, the composer is pretty clear with what they want, and what I mean is they either tell me what they want or the music speaks for itself. The music is pretty self-explanatory. So I would say that I am given a lot of freedom in the route in which we take to get to the final product. But the final product is already decided upon by somebody else. It's already an idea that exists. I'm just bringing it to that point. I will obviously know how to make it sparkle a bit more and to make it more of what it already is. But when it comes to flipping the cue on its head, no, I generally don't take those types of liberties. Well, generally, so if a director has a comment, I absolutely am going to implement that comment. I'm going to do it right then and there. Generally, the composer or the music editor for film scores is the liaison between me and the filmmakers. So comments from the filmmakers generally don't happen too frequently. It's mainly the composer who has the comments. But if a director or a producer has a comment, I will definitely address that. So when I mix a film score, generally what I do is before I even start, I listen to the composer's ref by itself, and then I listen to the ref with dialogue and sound effects, just so I can get an idea of the sonic landscape of the scene that's being scored. Generally, the composer has already done a good job of staying out of the way of dialogue and sound effects. You can't really compete sonically with an explosion. So I just like to get a general idea, and then I turn off the sound effects, and I mix the cue. And after mixing for a bit, and I think that it's a good standalone piece of music, I'll listen to it with dialogue and sound effects, and I'll make adjustments accordingly. I want it to be a piece of audio that can fit into the greater story and the greater film.
Well, how about there's still a sound mixer, right?
Yes, there's a
So they will mix the score.
yeah. Well, they'll
And
I mix the piece of music as a as a piece of music. I'll mix it, and I'll make accommodations for sound effects and dialogue if necessary. But yeah, there's a step after me in film scores that's something called a dub or a final mix, which is when they take all the audio for the entire movie, dialogue, sound effects, backgrounds, Foley, all of it, music, and they mix it together. And they might get stems from me, and they'll say, oh, you know what, there's too much low end happening here, because they have updated their sound effects, so they might remove a timpani hit or something, or reduce it. So there's a step after in me that massages the whole sonic landscape even more.
cool. Good to know.
So I really cut my teeth with Hans, and I owe a lot to him for making me the person that I am. Working with him, it's always very focused, it's always very organized, it's always very efficient, and it's always a good product. And that's really, what it's like. You get into a room with him, and he is the man in charge, and he commands a lot from everyone, and that's a great thing.
Cool. Mm-hmm. So
So I've mixed a number of scores for Hollywood, and I've mixed a number of songs and score for the Chinese market, including Tencent. Um, they're both similar in that I'm using the same technology to mix them both, and I'm using my orchestral knowledge to mix them both. One thing that's different is the Chinese market is all the way in China. So I'm communicating with people on the other side of the world, and that's pretty cool. They also have ideas about how certain instruments should sound. Like a pipa and guzheng have a certain sound to the producers and composers I've worked with in China that seems to fall within a pretty common idea. Whereas in Hollywood, it's the gamut. You could have a guzheng going through a 12-second reverb to create an effect. So those are some of the main differences. Generally, when working with Chinese directors and producers, of course, there's a language barrier. There's a language barrier with everybody who's not of a common language. But like with any creative process, there's always going to be a back and forth, and the way that we figure that out is they make a comment, I do something, they either say, this is right, you've gone too far, or this is perfect, or you've not gone far enough, or it's not bright enough. So it's just like any creative process, but it just so happens that we don't speak the same language. Yes, I had a small role in Venom. I was the tape op for another engineer named Chris Vogel, who's very talented, and I also edited the score. Not the music editor, but when we received the recordings, what I do is I comp everything together and choose the best takes, but also I try and make it as musical editorially as possible. Yeah, in the future, I would love to work with more Chinese projects. I think that China is a growing market and a growing creative place that is trying to influence the world culturally, and I would love to help usher that in.